Hey everyone, Emil here with the pre-show of this unexpected bonus episode. As you know, we recently had an episode with Matt from Roleplay Chat, and if you didn't, go watch, or listen rather, that one right now. And we recorded the second episode for his show. And we agreed to both upload the episode where we guested to our shows as well, as a bonus. So, here you go. Go check out Roleplay Chat on all podcasting platforms or on Twitter, roll as in ROLE_play_chat to get updates on his amazing show. So, without further ado, have fun with this little bonus.
Hello, everybody. I am Matt, and welcome to Roleplay Chat. We are game masters who can't stop talking about role-playing games. And today, we're going to talk about one-shots. And I have with me some very special guests from the DoubleDM pod. They're going to be here today to talk about one-shots, and you guys should also check out their podcast, which is very similar to Roleplay Chat, where they do deep dives on all kinds of RPG topics. So I'll without further ado, I'll let them introduce themselves, and then we'll get on with today's show.
Hello, I'm Emil from DoubleDM Pod. Like introduced, we do deep dives on any topic TTRPG related, be it meta, roleplay, mechanical, or anything in between.
And I'm Niels. I'm also with DoubleDM podcast, obviously. And Emil and I, we're both from Germany. We've known each other for many years, played together a lot, and shared stories and tips from our DMing experiences with each other. And from that came this podcast we are hosting right now.
Awesome. Yeah. So do you guys want to talk a little bit about your tabletop RPG experiences really quick, the Sparks Notes version of where you guys started? What you're playing now?
Okay, I will start. The thing is, for me, I started in 8th grade on a school trip. We were on a school trip, on a week-long school trip to somewhere in Germany. And a friend said, well, my father plays this game with me. How about we play that in the evenings when we have free time on the school trip? And we were like, well, yeah, sure, why not? And yeah, that's the first time I got introduced to a very crude version of The Dark Eye, a German role-playing game. When we came back, the father of my friend invited us to actually play a campaign. We are still playing that campaign today.
That's awesome. I love it when they go forever. Like,
yeah, it's I think I'm in my year 9 or 8 right now of TTRPG playing in general and that campaign itself. We started in August somewhere, and yeah, I've learned a lot since then. I've gone from 8th grade to nearly finishing my bachelor's degree in university now. So yeah, I've grown a lot as a person, and I think a lot of that is through TTRPGs as well.
Awesome. How about you, Nils?
Yeah, I started in, I think, 2014, it would be, through a live stream from a German online TV channel. The Rocket Beans played one game they invented, or a rule set they created, and I would love to try it, so I had to DM it the first time because nobody of my friends actually played TTRPGs in the first place, knew how to play them, or anything like this. So yeah, I'm playing since 2014 and DMing ever since, basically. But yeah, as you can imagine, over the years, my style has changed a lot, added to it, and yeah, that's me.
That's awesome. Yeah, and I mean, I guess I should give myself a little intro too, because I think we're going to be swapping audio, right? So for the DoubleDM pod listeners, I'm Matt. probably heard me last week, and for the Roleplay Chat listeners, you probably heard the DoubleDM guys last week as well. But at the risk of repeating myself, I also have been a game master for quite some time. I started in university, and that was about, when did I graduate university? I guess like 7 or 8 years ago now, which is kind of crazy to think about. Anyway, I started playing 3.5, D&D 3.5, and have been playing every edition since. Play some Pathfinder, 1st and 2nd edition, Warhammer, 1st and 2nd edition, and the Faiths system are systems that I really like playing with. Yeah, so like I said, today we're going to talk about one-shots, and I have a very, one-shots have a very near and dear place in my heart, because as a parent of 2 children, I now very rarely have time to commit to a long-haul campaign. So I get my itch of game mastering with, I mean, I probably run as many one-shots as I would if I was running a regular campaign at this point, but that's neither here nor there. Anyway, so yeah, one-shots. I guess we'll follow the typical Roleplay Chat formula of, explaining what we as game masters and as a panel, what we think a one-shot is. I think it's pretty straightforward, but you never know. Sometimes people have interesting thoughts. So I'll pass the microphone on to one of you two. I'll let you guys pick, and we'll start with creating like a common definition of what a one-shot is to us.
Niels, do you want to start?
Yeah, sure. For me, a one-shot would be a single session of any TTRPG you would like to run in a confined time frame. Something like this, yeah. A confined time frame and one session only would be my definition of a one-shot.
Okay,
Awesome. Yeah.
Nearly the same, but in a few key points different than Niels, because for me a one-shot is a single contained adventure. That could be because that is, you, for example, meet in a town, get a quest, finish that quest. That's a one-shot. However long that takes the group. Now, if the quest obviously becomes at level 1, kill the big bad dragon that is challenge rating 24, then okay, yeah, that's a campaign. But generally, anything that can be finished in 1, 2, or maybe even 3 sessions of time. Maybe if the group is very roleplay heavy, they might not get a lot of progress in the dungeon. So yeah, I don't think I can really say that it's just one session for me.
That's super cool. So for you could still call it a one-shot if it lasts 3 nights.
Yeah.
That's neat. Okay, so maybe we can dissect a little bit about why you think that. But I think I'm on the Nils camp of what a one shot is. It just from my experiences, I really like it to be self-contained. Everything in the game occurs in one evening. Usually 3 to 5 hours worth of play. That's it. That's all. And there's some. I guess to add some flavor that's maybe a little bit more personal to me, I especially like one-shots that don't necessarily need to be isolated, right? So it can be a self-contained adventure that happens in one night, but maybe they're with recurring characters. Maybe they're with characters from an ongoing campaign, and you're doing like a filler episode, or like a weird time shift where you're exploring an alternate reality or something like that. So and I know, Nils, that your definition didn't necessarily exclude that, but I'm just kind of adding on to that. A one shot in its purest form is one evening of play, beginning, middle, and end, that happens in one sitting. But the characters or progress based off of that can definitely bleed into other things. Yeah. So are we happy with kind of our communal understanding of what a one-shot is? I think people listening will also have a pretty good understanding.
I mean, for me, the thing becomes, I don't know. Let me ask you, how long have your average sessions always been?
Like in a recurring game?
Anything. In a one-shot
Anything?
or a recurring campaign, anything.
Usually it's from like about 8 o'clock to midnight. That's kind of so that's
8
what.
a.m.?
No, 8 p.m. to midnight. So about 4 or
Okay.
5 hours, something like this. Yeah.
Niels?
How about
Yeah,
you
for
guys?
me, it's been about for about 3 to 6, and in rare occasions, even 10 plus hours.
See,
But
in
in
those
general,
rare
3 to
occasions,
6.
these rare occasions, when you were a player in those, who has run those?
Yeah, you did.
See,
You did.
that's the problem. I come from a from a table. This game
Yeah.
I started with. The game sessions lasted 16 hours. Every single month or every 2 months we played 16 hours. Not in a continuous sitting, but we mostly played like 10 hours, slept for like 7, and then we played the next 5 to 6 hours again and on the next day.
Yeah.
That was
Wow.
because we were all in high school. We all had the luxury of not having anything to do on a Saturday and Sunday. And the father of my friend, who was the only working adult at that time, had no problem with that being his whole free time of the whole weekend. So, yeah, that's where I come from. And then when we all went to college, we had to change because suddenly every one of us had college classes, work, other obligations like a girlfriend or something, sports, and yeah, and then it became okay, well, we can only play 4 hours. And when we had one shots, we also had the 16-hour session format. We met up for a whole weekend and played, and that's all we did on that weekend mostly. And that's why I think when we talk about one-shot sessions, I always think of the 4-hour session that everybody knows, even though that's not a session necessarily for me. Because in those 16 hours, yes, we finished the whole adventure. But in the 4 hours, my group gets problematic with that. We are still trying to find a good way in 4 hours to actually finish an adventure. Because maybe the better definition for me would be even to have something that has a start, a middle part, and an end to it.
Mhm.
So that it's a self-contained, again, self-contained in the meaning of it has something somewhere starting and it has somewhere to end. It just doesn't end in nothingness. Because I hate it when something doesn't end.
Yeah, no, it's got to have a start, a beginning, and end. Like that's, I feel like at least for me anyway, the use of a one shot is to scratch the itch of playing the game. And like you said, Emil, if you don't end the game, why did you do it? Like you're running this it's basically half a one shot or half a session or half a game. But I really like your experience about saying, you play these really long haul sessions. So maybe our definition of a one shot ought to have a legitimate time restriction. A game with a beginning, middle, and end that finishes in 4 hours or something like this, or maximum of 5 hours of like IRL playtime. But yeah, cool. So I guess maybe from there I'll segue to what kind of things you guys like seeing in a one shot. Like maybe your favorite experience playing a one shot or your favorite experience running a one shot. Something that really stands out to you, and then we can kind of use that for fuel for our conversation. Is there something that comes to mind to either of you?
Yes, instantly. The best one shot I ever played in was a one shot in the Smurf role playing game. And that
I
is
didn't know
because,
that existed.
yeah, nobody does.
Okay.
But it does. At least in German, it does. And the thing is, a friend of mine wanted to run this for like 5 years, and we never got to. And then she finally said, "Hey, I'm running this." And I'm like, "Okay, I'm a part of this." And a few other friends were part of it, and we played, and we all created Smurfs. And Smurfs are very simple characters, you could say. They are mostly the personification of one character trait, and only one character trait. They have a name, they are blue, they have pants, and they have a character trait.
That
Nothing
makes for
else.
good content for a one shot. It's
Yeah.
sweet, it's simple, it's to the point.
And my character's name is basically the best way you can get all of those things into one. His name was Crazy. I played a crazy old Smurf that threw bombs around. And that was not bombs around, but basically just made C4 and other explosives.
Yeah, Dino.
And
nice.
and that created such a fun character because I didn't have to do any work beforehand in reading into a setting or getting myself into a character, because I just went there and like, well, I'm crazy now. And that was the character, and that was the best experience I ever had playing in one, I have to say. Even though I've had tons of other one-shots I really loved, this was so simple, and it was such a great experience just because of that.
You know, I actually think that is such a fantastic embodiment of a one shot. You're totally right. Like a simple character like that would kind of be boring to play, I think, in a long running game, right? Like if you had to play this guy or girl or Smurf, I guess, for 15 games running, you'd be bored 3 games in max. But the one shot allowed this like really interesting ecosystem where you can play such a unidimensional character and have a blast. And like, if anything, that was probably to the benefit of the one shot, right? Like it you were able, whoever were you run, I guess you weren't running this game. Someone else was running it for you. But like, I'm sure it allowed them to keep the pace of the game like to their they could stay on track of time. Like, you know, you had simple characters with simple objectives. Not to like belittle that, but it helps when something is simple to keep to keep the clock like, in mind. You know what I mean? Yeah. Super cool. That's a lot of fun.
The thing about it is that it was her second time DMing something, but the first time DMing this group, and generally really trying to DM good. I know she's listening, and I know that I'm just now belittling your first one shot, but let's face it, that one wasn't really good. But that's okay, it's a learning experience. But the second one was, I had a tons of fun, and it was great. And she made it, we had simple characters, every one of us had simple characters, and it made for very simple characters to get on track and create a very linear story that we can all play through and have fun, and that is all we wanted from this game.
Yeah, and that's what I think that's a fantastic way to run a one shot. Make it simple characters, linear game. Maybe linear. Maybe I have something to think about that. Something to say about that. But it's definitely not out of the question to run a linear one shot. You know, everyone's on the same page. They know that they're coming to play for a short period of time. So you kind of, there's this buy-in to being significantly more railroaded than in a sandbox adventure. You know what I mean? Cool. How about you, Nils? What was one of your favorite one-shot experiences?
Probably the one-shot that's turned right now into a sort of mini campaign series, because we wanted to play just one session, but now we are facing the 4th session already, because it just keeps dragging on, and we do crazy shit, and then some other crazy shit happens, and then and so on and so forth, as stuff does. Because it's the first real one shot I'm playing in. The other one shots I always or normally DM'd, and now the first time playing actually in a one shot is different from coming from a campaign. I had to switch my mindset a lot, and another player is also a forever DM in this one shot, and so we just went off in different directions, what we usually would do in a campaign, but can't really do that well in a one shot. That's something I have to learn or have to think about when we play. But yeah, that's mostly awesome. Most memorable one shot I played in.
What about games that you've run? Like, do you have a one shot that you ran that you're like really proud of?
Yeah, I ran a one shot that sparked the idea for another campaign. I talked about it on our show once. It was an introduction one shot for new players into Dungeons and Dragons. It was, and I wanted to use an iconic monster, an iconic enemy, but not using dragons because that would be too cliche. So I started to rummage through the monster manual and found the Beholder, because I think The Beholder is pretty iconic, but not too overused in public media.
Mm-hmm. For
It turns
sure.
out the party was completely wiped. 2 were turned into zombies, 1 were turned into a stone statue, and 1 was turned into dust. But now we have an incentive for other adventurers to free the land of the now ruling Death Tyrant.
That's awesome. You know, and it's actually awesome that you talk about having characters die in a one shot. I feel like when I play in a one shot, I have so much less attachment to my character because I've only just, you know, created them a couple of days before the game or was given the character that same night, and they were like, the game master was like, okay, this is your character, have fun with it. So you kind of end up doing a lot more wacky stuff, taking like big risks. Sometimes they pay off and it creates a fantastically dramatic moment in the game. Other times you have a total party kill and nobody's too upset about it because it hasn't been their character for 5 years or whatever. You know what I mean? Oh, that's awesome. That's really cool.
That's nice. I also have a one-shot I ran that I talked about in the one-shot episode, I think, because that one-shot was called Mystery in Shawmore Bay. And that came from an idea that I was on a big Nancy Drew hype, the novels, and even the TV series. I watched that too, and I was like, well, I want to do that. So how do I get a teen sleuth horror game going, right? And then I was like, okay, which systems can I use? And I found the Bubble Gumshoe system, and now people can maybe see what I do with one shots most of the time, because I never play the systems I normally would play, which are D&D, The Dark Eye, or maybe other ones like the Witcher game that we've run a campaign in. But those systems I won't use for a one-shot because I think one-shots are great to test new stuff. That goes for players in player characters and for DMs in systems or DM styles. But I think that game was my masterpiece. That piece de resistance, that I don't think I've run anything better at that time until now. And that was because I set up everything. I made and it was a session that went 16 hours, but we were clear about that at the beginning. We said, no, we don't want like 4 hours or something. We were longer. And I know that we said that may not even be a one-shot anymore. But generally, it was a very fun evening that I had planned out a lot of stuff for, and I presented them with so many horrible cosmic horror choices and moral questions that they actually went home thinking, fuck.
Yeah.
Nothing bad happened, but fuck. And it was so good that my players asked me for installment 2 and 3. So, yeah, we're doing that now. So
That's great. I love it when people come, they're like, more, please. And you're like,
yeah.
yes, that's exactly the reaction I was hoping for. But you touched on a couple things that I think are really interesting. And actually, I want to talk about today in this discussion is prepping for a one shot. And yeah, I know a 16 game it's not the same as a 4-hour game, but I have a tendency to do the same thing when I'm planning a one shot. I tend to go a little bit deeper into my planning so that I have more of the things figured out. And I think that's maybe a stereotype that people have. Like people have this presumption that a one shot is something easy to do. It's one night. It's going to happen quickly. But it's the polar opposite. You know, in my experience, running a one shot is far more time consuming to plan for than something ongoing. Because when it's a one shot, you have to worry about, at least from my perspective, I worry so much about making the experience so condensed that you got to have everything in it, right? You got to have a little bit of roleplay. You got to have an interesting dynamic combat. You got to have some fun exploration, sleuth type activities so that you really touch on everything that a system has to offer. And to make that all what's the word, like uniform and feel natural, it's so much work. So I'm really happy to hear you say that that you do that too, because when I'm planning a one shot, yeah, I go in like every nook and cranny of the map or of the environment that I'm putting my players in, and like I go ham. Like I plan way too much. I guess the benefit there though is you can then reuse it, right? You can just reuse one shots over and over again with different audiences, which can be fun. But are you like this too, Nils, or are you going to say that we're crazy and that you just, when you run a one shot, it's the opposite?
Well, I can agree to 99%, I think, because if I completely think about the one shot on my own without any little ideas or help from others, it is exactly like you say, like 100%, and even write most of the dialogue that NPCs start, write it out in sentences, which I then can read out loud or paraphrase in different ways. And sometimes even search out music or perfect pictures, sometimes even draw them or draw items that they can find and stuff like that. But yeah, most of the time it is exactly like you described. Over prepping
I guess,
and yeah, just mania of paperwork and notes, and then you are in a session and can't find the right note and have to rifle through every freaking page you have on your desk right there.
but you did touch on something interesting there. You're right. There is a lot of prepared content for one shots.
Yeah.
So absolutely, I'm not a big fan of that. I like the creative process, but by no means am I diminishing people who use pre-made content. There's so many awesome modules out there, and there's so many independent creators that make and publish like compendiums of one shots. So yeah, that's one way to cut down on your prep time. So if you're listening and you're like, I hate one shots because they take too long to prep, go buy on the DMs Guild like a $3 or pay what you want compendium of one shots, and I'm sure you'll have a fun time with that.
Yeah, I believe that a lot for one shots there isn't a formula to prepping them, but Matt, you touched on that you basically need to have a little bit of everything, because for example, if you're running D&D, D&D is supposed to run on 3 pillars: social, combat, and exploration. So if you want to run a D&D one-shot and you have these 3 pillars in mind, I would suggest touching on every one of those 3 pillars at least once, maybe twice, depending on what your group is. If the group is very good at social encounters, maybe throw 2 in, just so they don't rush through the encounters too quickly. But generally, you need to have all of those, so you can convey the experience best as possible, I would say. Like, it's not like you need to put on a good show, but if you botch the combat and don't have a combat in your one shot, and you have especially newer players at your table, they will maybe go home thinking, well, this game isn't even combat, and I like fighting in video games, for example. Why can't I do that in that game? Then you kind of forgot a big pillar of the actual game.
Yeah, for sure. I think that's really good advice, right? When you're prepping a one shot, think of the different activities, think of the different things. If it's a new system, right? I tend to use one shots a similar way as you do, Emil. That I take a one shot and I take a system that I'm like, I want to play around with this. Let's try a new thing. But then you might not be as familiar with what the pillars are. But my kind of strategy for that is I usually think of, okay, what kind of characters might we have in the party, and how do I make each of those characters shine? Give each of the 3 or 4 or 5 people at your table a moment where them and them alone can do this, like, Oscar-winning moment, whether it's combat and they hold the line, whether it's investigative work to solve a mystery or whatever, using the skill tree of the characters based on that system. It's a good indication to try and create different activities in your game that will address the pillars of that system. Because yeah, if it's a new system to you, you might not be super familiar with that kind of thing. If it's D&D, yeah, the 3 pillars, that's almost a surefire recipe for success.
Yeah.
And I think, Matt, you touched on a really interesting thing there, or a really tough challenge for me, especially when I plan one-shots, is to make everyone shine within this confined time. Because in a campaign, you don't really have much trouble about this. You can make shine one character in one session and the next one in the second arc or something like that. But you have to kind of compress all these moments into one session or into one adventure, and I think that's especially hard, especially for newer DMs, I think.
Mhm. For my advice for that would probably be let your players make characters before the one shot itself.
Yeah,
Because
that's a big thing too.
because I've been part of some groups where people tell you that creating characters at the table is better, and I'm like, for campaigns, yes. When I play a campaign, I always tell my players, don't create a character. Don't even think about the character concept too much before we meet up for session 0 or session 1 or whatever you want to call it. But in a one shot, I hand them the system as soon as I know we will play that one shot with that group and say, go about creating characters. If you have any questions, ask me. I am always ready for character creation sessions if you want those. If a player wants to call me on Discord like 5 weeks before we actually play the one shot, or 2 days or whatever, I'm always up for that and say, okay, let's do that. Then I can learn about the character and the system itself. It works. I can learn what they are creating. But the thing is, as soon as I have the characters for the one shot, I might have already a construct prepared. For example, for one of the one shots I had like, okay, I want them to go through a jungle. So the jungle concept was there, and then they handed me characters, and I was like, okay, let's look at what these characters can do. What challenges will I present to them that they can? And for that, I look at the character sheet. And even before I get the characters, I can look at the character sheet and prepare the game around those challenges, right? Because the only thing your players can roll on is on the character sheet, after all. So that's the only thing that they will start thinking about doing. If there isn't a skill that is meant to represent bashing indoors, there won't be someone that does that. So I won't create a challenge about bashing indoors, because that's nothing where someone can shine. That's either the game says you do that narratively and just someone does it, or the game doesn't even have rules for that, and then I'm like, well, then I can't create a challenge about it. So why would I create a challenge about it?
Yeah, no, for sure. I think that's, and I like that you talk about character creation. I take a slightly different approach though. Especially recently, I've actually taken it upon myself to create characters for my one shots. And part of the reason why I do this, I know it's maybe quote unquote controversial, because I know a lot of players, when they play games, part of their fun is creating characters. Part of their fun is curating the like the vessel that they're going to be traveling through the one shot with. But the reason why I really like creating characters for my one shots ahead of time is because I can really make them super relevant, right? I can make sure that, okay, there's going to be a challenge in this that's very stealth based. There's going to be a stealth, like I'm going to put in a character who's going to succeed at stealth. I can also make them have the narrative baggage in the character sheet that's relevant to the game, so that roleplay can be fun, right? You can still create and curate dramatic roleplay moments by seeding in things into these one-shot characters that maybe you're going off to save a family member, or you're seeing your local village being burnt down, and you got to run in and collect the staff that the clergyman keeps, and it's like the symbol of your whole town. So adding in these really strong links to the one shot you're playing is going to be really important. Sorry for those of you listening, you might be hearing a bunch of pinging. One of my friends is like sending me direct messages. I should like put myself on do not disturb mode or something. But yes, so back to My position is create the characters first, because you can make them as relevant as needed to give them the time, like give them the spotlight because you have them created. I'll usually do like, let's say there's X players in the party, I'll do like X plus 2 characters, and then I'll put them all on the table and say, okay, have at it. Take 5 minutes to pick which character you want. Part of the reason I do this too is because I've allowed my players to create characters the night of the one shot, and that always went horribly wrong, and the one shot became a 3 shot or a 2 shot because it took us an hour to finalize the characters. So that's where I come. That's my position on characters.
Yeah, for pre-made characters, I'm always like, yes, they are great for all the reasons you mentioned, and I've used pre-made characters for my best one-shot, my best session I ever ran as well. There I use pre-made characters, I said, because the Bubble Gumshoe system, I don't know if it's all the Gumshoe systems, but the Bubble Gumshoe system itself says that there is a skill group, which are basically like the core skills of a sleuth game, which are like perception or clue finding, running away, or whatever skills. Those were like 5 skills or 6 skills, and all of those skills you don't roll on them. They just happen if your players have them. So the problem with that is that if none of them has that skill, the skill is you remove.
Doesn't happen. Yeah.
It doesn't happen anymore. So I needed to make sure that that every one of those 6 skills was put into the game, and everyone had at least one of them, and they didn't have the same one, because when I know my players, I know all 5 of those players that played that night. If I would have let them create characters on their own, and even said, hey, you have these skills, you need to have all of those, communicate with each other, they would have communicated in a way like, well, I take this. Well, no, I want to take this. Well, we both take it. And then I'm like, yeah, well, you know that's not how this is supposed to work.
And all 5 players have perception and nothing else.
Yeah. Okay. Quick tangent. I hate that perception is a kitchen sink for a lot of people.
That's fair.
Nearly everyone takes perception proficiency in D&D or skills that skill because it is so useful. And I can't blame him. I can't blame the DMs that use it often, because when the players ask, what do I see? The first question becomes, well, what do you see? But I don't know if it's a game design problem, if it's just my perception of the skill or something, but it's always bugged me that it feels like it's so much more valuable than other skills, like a skill that's only meant for disguising yourself, which only comes up in a very specific set of scenes. My perception can be used in every single scene that I can think of.
Yeah, no, that's a super good point. And I agree with you. It's not great, but I think you have to. My house rule for whenever I'm playing D&D or running a game of D&D is that perception tends to be generally like weak, unless you're very specific about what it is you're trying to perceive, if that makes any sense. So if you're just saying, I walk into the room, what do I see? You're not going to get a very, like, you're going to have to roll extraordinarily well just to see something average. But if you say, I investigate this statue and like look for buttons on the statue, okay, well then maybe your perception roll is going to be a little bit more warranted. But that's a super cool system. I've never heard of the Bubble Gumshoe system, and that is so cool that there are quote unquote like mandatory skills, because that also enables each character to have their own moment of spotlight, because each of them, like if you divide those 6 skills in your Bubble Gumshoe game between the 4 or 5 players, you're guaranteeing that each character is going to have a moment where they're the only ones that can do something. Which is that's neat. That's really neat. I might go check that out another time.
Yeah, it's a very simple narrative system because you don't roll on many skills. Just a few other normal skills, but there are a few skills you don't roll on, and they just happen because that's how the game is supposed to work. You're always supposed to find the clues you need to finish to solve the mystery.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
yeah, Niels, do you have anything on character creation?
Mm, I like to go as wild as I can when I create characters for one shots because I like to use one shots as opportunities to try stuff, like weird class combinations or item combinations, spell effect combinations, stuff like that. Or as a DM, use new monsters I found online or made myself or haven't used yet, or all that kind of thing. I like to go wild in these.
Is
On
there
these
is there
regards.
a monster that you've run recently that you're like, everybody's got to use this now in their next game?
I am about to run next coming Sunday with a Tlinkali, I think it is called in D&D. It is some sort of 8-legged, 2-armed scorpion human insect hybrid thing with a greatsword in one hand and a paralyzing stinger on the back, and it's kind of weird, but
Yeah, sounds sounds interesting.
and
Sounds a lot.
it's interesting because it has a climbing and a burrowing speed, if I remember correctly. So they can grab someone, climb to the ceiling, throw them to the floor, and then just disappear into the wall. It's just those things kind of get overlooked often, and I like to use these lesser known monsters a lot because then my players, even if they don't want to, they cannot metagame because they have never heard of this stat block before.
That's cool. That's really cool.
Mhm.
All right, sweet. I'll maybe take us in a completely different direction unless you guys want to keep talking about character creation and monsters and stuff. But yeah, I'm gonna change gears real quick and talk a little bit about pacing. And we also got some questions about that on Twitter. So I'm gonna read out a couple questions. There's two that are pretty similar, but I think that will be good fuel for our conversation, and they relate to pacing. So how do you keep a little ghost with satire horns? So at a ghostophelli, they say
Eli.
how.
Eli, it's a friend of ours.
Oh, a ghost of Eli. Okay, thank you. That makes sense. They ask, how do you keep pacing that allows everything that you want to happen without feeling forced or rushed? And then somebody else asks a similar question, where Pod of Blunders at Pod of Blunders, they asked any tips or tricks for pacing if you only have a set amount of time to get through your one shot. So if I boil these two questions down to kind of one common theme, is it's how do you make sure that you get through your one shot on time without feeling forced or rushed? So I guess I'll throw the question out into the open and see what you guys have to say, and I'll also take some time to think and answer.
I instantly have one thing, and that's, I think, the most common mistake I see, or that I at least did for one shots, was letting the party meet each other. Because when you start a one shot and you only have 4 hours, and the hour starts with, well, you meet in a tavern, and we talked about this last week that the tavern start is great, and it is.
Mhm.
But if
Not for
it's
one shots.
Yeah, but the thing is, then again, you have you scatter all your 5 players or 4 players in the tavern, and there are 2 NPCs, and then you say, well, what do you guys do? And then they're like, okay, well, why am I in this tavern? Well, you are here for the night. Okay, I'm here for the night. What do I do now? And then, okay, I go to bed, and then you have this problem. If they either need to meet each other quickly, or they need to know each other beforehand. For example, one shot I ran, which was a D&D one shot to introduce a few players to D&D, was they all arrived per ship to a city on the same ship, but they didn't know each other. Well, except for one that arrived per city gate. And the thing was that the night before, someone was killed in the harbor. And the mayor of that town just basically shut down the whole town and said everyone that looks like an adventurer, is looking for work or whatever, is instantly brought to the castle to me, so I can task them with finding out who in my personal staff, who out of my trusted advisors is betraying me. Because it was kind of obvious that one of the people close to the mayor betrayed him. And that way I brought them basically in the first 20 minutes together to one common objective. And that was the most important part. You need a common objective. A common theme that gets them to the goal you actually want them to have. That's the best thing that cuts down a lot of the beginning times of, what are we gonna do now? If you give them a very clear goal of what they're supposed to do and that they're supposed to do it together, or that they have to do it together, then they will do that, because first of all, players are not dumb. They will then, most of the time, if they're not assholes, will go that way together.
Well, especially in a one shot, right? Like there's this common understanding that we're gonna stick to the objective that's presented to us, because otherwise, why are you playing a one shot? Like, if that makes sense. But yeah, no, sorry to interrupt. Keep going if you had more to say.
And the second thing is, and I know a lot of people don't want to hear this, but railroad. Railroading is not bad. It's bad if you abuse it to make your players feel like they're just experiencing your game. If you make sure they stay on track, make sure they don't go off on tangents, make sure they don't do something weird or bad even to the story, then you're probably gonna finish in time. It sounds very bad because the DM basically shuts down doors that they are not supposed to shut down. And I'm like, well, don't make the doors, right?
Mm-hmm.
You don't need to present an option for them to go to somewhere where they're not supposed to go. Just don't present the option. Most of the time, they won't even start to think about that option then. There's, like, the thing is about invisible walls. You need to know when to place invisible walls, where you can place them without making the game actually feel constraining to them. And a lot of people say that that's already way too much. I'm doing my players a disservice. I've been insulted for that take a lot of times already. And I was like, well, I don't care.
No, I agree
It's
with
how
it
I
100%.
make sure.
Yeah, and I think there's this common misconception, right, that railroading means you remove your player's agency in the game. I think that's not true. You can still direct the game in a certain direction, but allow players to have, allow them to be creative in their solutions, allow them to tackle problems how they want to, but don't go presenting them problems that don't relate directly to the narrative that you're telling in the one shot. The one shot has to be so like this micro environment that's so specific about the objective that's been presented in the first 10 minutes of the game and the desired outcome. Because if you present anything outside of that, then yeah, you're gonna have a hard time sticking to your timelines. How about you, Nils? Did you have things?
Yeah, I have something I usually like to put in points of no return for pacing, because I like to present a choice to my players, and the choice matters, leads to different things. But when they make a choice, they cannot come back. For a simple example, they are in a cavern and the way splits left and right. They go the left route. After that, stones fall down and block off the tunnel. So even if they are not happy in the after they made the choice, they've made the choice and they have to stick with it. That just keeps them thinking forward and not what if we went the other way. So this helps to keep the pace a bit more focus oriented or forward oriented for the players' mindsets.
That's really cool. I like that a lot.
And you don't have to use, or I don't just use physical blockings or blockades, but mental or other things as well. Like if you have a choice between two NPCs for to which one you go for help, the other one may be insulted that you didn't choose him, and then just blocks off any conversation regarding that topic with them.
Yeah, and something, I mean, I really like the way you presented that. I never thought of it in that lens before, but I've done something similar that I really like doing, where it's you make time specific events. So there's a party, or there's a social gathering, or there's a feast, and there are elements of the game that are locked into that event, and then when that event is done, as a game master, you push it along, and the feast is over. And if you didn't interact with the right things, you're missing that information. There's no going back. So that's one way that I like to lock the decisions. But I really liked the analogy you made with the paths. That's cool.
Hmm.
Um,
I also have an advice for players regarding that. If you want to be very, very helpful to your DM in pasting the one-shot, don't create overly complex characters. Like we said that pre-generated characters are okay, but if your DM says create a character yourself, don't think about it too much. Like again with my Smurf character, make it simple. Make it a simple character concept. I want to play a big dude. That's a character concept in and of itself. And then you can go, okay, for D&D, I take the Goliath, I take Barbarian, I take Great Axe, I'm done. And that way, because what I think that slows the game down is another thing is players trying to hog spotlight. A player that when 5 people come to a one shot, 4 people created very simple characters, very easy, very hey, I'm a sorcerer that likes fire spells. Well, I'm a wizard who's annoyed by anybody dumber than me. I'm the barbarian that is dumb and smashes in doors. Yes, I know that's also stereotype, blah 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 blah. And the thing is, if then a character comes, well, I'm the bard, son of a noble family, exiled by my father for taking too much bread from the pantry or something, you're the outlier in that group. And yes, it may seem that you're the only one that put effort into their character, but you're the one at the end that might even be slowing the game down. Because if you play your character out at the campfire, then it becomes a lot of, well, talking about me, and that takes time away that the DM never planned for. If you're at the campfire and start talking about yourself, the DM never plans for that. Nils and I were in a one-shot together as players where a friend ran the game. We all created characters, and I would say every one of us created very simple characters. Sure, my character had a few secrets, Nils had a few secrets, and all of them, they all had their stuff. They were full-made characters, and we were sitting at a campfire once, and we were talking for like 10 minutes. But after those 10 minutes were over as a group, we all more or less agreed that we need to go further in the adventure so that we don't drag this out too much at the end. So we all went to bed and then went on with the next day. We could have maybe talked for like 40 minutes longer at that campfire. And that's fine for some groups, but the DM is sitting there and thinking, oh shit, I'm not gonna finish this adventure in time.
Yeah, well, and I like that you bring that up, right? It's definitely a player responsibility to keep track of the pace of the game as well. It becomes blurry when it's new players, right? They're not used to those responsibilities, or they don't know that they have to pay attention to that. One way that I like to kind of prevent those long-winded conversations from happening is being so specific. Like my setup, I spend almost as much time thinking about my setup. I think about my setup of my one shot more than any other part of the one shot. You know, those first 5 minutes where the quest is being delivered to the party and the descriptions of the environment the party finds themselves in at the beginning of the one shot, I think are extremely important. So when I'm planning a one shot, it's very common for me to kick them off right in the action. Okay, you're doing a heist to go get, the treasure, the ruby of the king. You're already inside the king's castle. You've made it to the 3rd floor. The king's bedroom is 5 rooms that way. That's your game. Boom. Like we're starting in this such a micro environment, and it's so clear that like you're on the quest. You can't turn around and go back. You've made it through the guards. You're on the 3rd floor. Have at it. And usually people say to me, Matt, that's so like 5 rooms is too short. But no, it's not. You put in some challenges, you make the rooms big enough with stuff to investigate, people to interact with. You've got 4 hours of gameplay. Like players are gonna find the time to fill those 5-6 rooms of gameplay for sure. So yeah, the way I do it is I start right in the action, usually in a space where like work has been made. Like they know their mission. I fast track to like this is your point. Go from there, so you can be like on a heist or halfway through a cave or a dungeon. You're in a disastrous environment. Kick off like a hot start for your one shot. I find works really well to kind of give the players like the propulsion in the right direction, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
I also think that there are certain settings, certain types of quests that lend themselves much better to one shots. I'm a big proponent of like a lot of sneaking around, a lot of thieves stuff, a lot of heisting, a lot of going to get this one person out of the dungeon, or like what's that word, hostage situations where you're trying to go save somebody or destroy something. Very singular objectives that tend to be like heisty, or like a kind of a thieves guild type of activity, that kind of thing. So I find that allows me to keep track of the pace of the game much better when I use a very specific setting or a very specific like quest type, if that makes sense. I don't know if you guys.
Yeah,
Oh,
so
go ahead.
basically, not just keeping the characters simple, but the quest line as well. Having some nooks and crannies where you can branch out, yeah, but the overall part not having it too complex. If I understood you correctly.
Exactly. Very, very simple. Even the layout too. Like I really like making maps of a cave system or of a building. And that's the game. Like we're not exploring the town. We're not exploring several islands. We are in this space, and I try to design the space to have a lot of different branching ways to get to the end objective, right? Like one room, it's not one room after another, where it's not a linear cave. There's maybe a waterfall with a secret path behind it, and so it's kind of like this web where the beginning is one point, and then it webs out, and then it webs back in to the end point. So it kind of has this semblance of being open enough that people can explore this little sandbox how they want to, but I'm funneling them back at the end. So it's branching out and then branching back in. So it's a simple quest, a simple enough space with the different pillars in it. Yeah.
Especially to that, I always like to, again, for pacing, the best thing is to start your games with a high. Like you said, maybe in medias res. For example, what I want to do, what I like to run for one shot, for example, are monster hunts or something.
Oh, cool. That's fun.
Hunt a very strong monster that is maybe a dragon. Kill the dragon that is terrorizing the city you arrive in. That's a very cool one shot for newer players or even older, even veteran players if you put a twist in it. But the thing about it is, I can start the game on a very high note. For example, my players are in a snowed-in tavern in the mountains. They sit there, they are in a blizzard, and it's dark outside. You hear the snow falling down onto the roof, and just coming down on you, and you basically staying in this tavern like for the next 2 days because the snow is too heavy. And you're all around in this room. It's cold, but you're all still managing, sitting there with your beer or whatever drink you have, any hot drink you have, any last heat that the tavern still has. And then the door slams open. Someone stumbles in. After 3 feet, they fall down, and you see monster claws on their back. And boom, that's the opening scene. What do you guys do? And then I also have a convenience explanation for why the players are in the tavern. They are there because they want to go somewhere, but the problem is that there's a monster outside. And then I can also tie them into where they need to kill this monster for whatever reason. The barkeep says he's willing to pay them. One of them maybe is a monster hunter that is here for that monster, and he can maybe convince the rest to help him. But generally, I start on a high, and the same goes for the end. If you start and end on a high, it's gonna be fun. It's if you make the start and the end a good action scene, for example, then you kind of make the middle part, like you said, Matt, branching out. It can be a little bit lower. It can be slow and
usually exploration based. For me,
Yeah.
that's where the exploration comes in the middle part. Find the right
Mhm.
way or solve the little the small mystery, and then exactly.
And then I get back to fight this evil Yeti monster in the snow, in its home turf. It's a gruesome fight, but you manage to win in the end, or you lose. You don't have emotional attachment to your character, so it's fine. And yeah, that way it works great because, like I said in the beginning, if there is no end to it, I probably won't have a lot of fun with it because it just feels left and it's empty. It doesn't have anything for me.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, people need to know when the game is done, right? Like it needs to be clear. I guess what we're getting at, and correct me if I'm misinterpreting what you guys are saying, but we want it to be super simple. Objective is simple. The characters are simple. The space you're exploring has to be simple, and it has to be clear that when the objective is done or not, it's done. Like and there might be ways to make morally gray choices, so you can still have an end case scenario that's like ambiguous, but what's ambiguous is not whether or not it's finished. Its finality needs to be clear, but whether or not the choice was like the morally correct one, or that can add some interesting flavor. But yeah, I guess keep it simple is the
Yeah.
But it's so much work to keep it simple, right? Like don't take making a game simple for granted. It's a lot of work to make a game simple.
And I think
Simple thing, Niels, please.
the simpler you make the game, the more prep or work you have to put in beforehand. It is equivalent, but inverted. If you know, I don't know the correct English word, but the simpler you want it to be, the more effort you have to put in the prepping phase to make it that simple.
Yeah, TTRPGs are very simply blow up, and that is in either length or depth or whatever dimension you want to go. TTRPGs are very easy because of how they are designed as a genre of media, you could say, because they allow players to do whatever they want. Yes, but doing whatever you want, that's a lot. I have a lot of ideas if you don't put constraints on me.
So we're running a little bit long. I think we're about at an hour, or maybe a little bit over that. So I don't know if you guys have any final thoughts about one shots that we didn't get to touch on, or little last minute tips or tricks that you want to bring up. I guess while you're thinking about it, I'll say one really quick one, and I think that you can spice up your one shot by having props. You can spice up your game by having props, but especially for a one shot, I think that's the time to bring out something fun and engaging. If it's a puzzle that you put out on the table for people to manipulate, or a nice map that something hand drawn or something you find on the internet, I find that having those physical components to a one shot, especially when you're introducing the game to new players, makes them go like, oh wow, that's what this is all about, and they kind of get excited about it. So that would be one thing that I would say too. Bring in something physical, add in that extra sensory experience so that it's not just rolling the dice at the table. I think that a one shot it's a good forum for that. How about you two? Any other last minute thoughts?
I would say don't shy away from creating one shots, even though it might sound like a lot of work. Putting that work in is a lot of fun, at least for me, and the end result will be worth it. Don't shy away from it, just do it. That would be the best tip I could give, probably, overall.
I think the best one-shots I've ever been in and ran all had a uniqueness to them. Make your one-shot unique. And this is kind of what Matt said, but maybe a little bit more general. Make it unique. Make it feel like a difference, because then you can draw in newer players with a unique experience that they've never had before in any other media. But you can also draw in veteran players that have played D&D or whatever TTRPG you want for like 10 years through something that they have never seen, never done before. Because the thing is, in a campaign that runs for like 50 sessions, 100, or even only 10, they might have had a lot of combat against zombies. So putting zombies in as a simple monster, well, that's not gonna spice things up for you.
That's a really good point. Make it different. Make it different from your usual games for sure. And it's a time to challenge yourself as a game master, right? Like try something new. If you screw up, whatever. Like you still had a fun time with your friends, drinking, partying, whatever, playing games. It's a good time. Cool. All right. Well, so with that, I think that wraps up our conversation about one shots. I feel like there's still so much to say. One shots are a fun topic to talk about. But anyway, thanks guys for being on the show to talk about one shots. Before we wrap up, is there anything that you guys wanted to plug? A little bit about your show so that the listeners of Roleplay Chat can also come find you.
Well, first of all, thanks for having us.
My
Thanks
pleasure.
for being on our show as well last week. And yeah, people can find us on nearly every or all of the big podcasting platforms under DoubleDM. We are 2 DMs, so DoubleDM makes sense. And we are found on Twitter and Instagram at DoubleDMPod. And yeah, come to us on Twitter. We are active there. We talk a lot about different things, ask questions, you can answer, try to make memes and be funny, all of that fun stuff.
Awesome. And yeah, you guys should definitely go check them out. They're a great podcast, and if you like what we're doing here at Roleplay Chat, you'll also like the conversations that they're having at Double DM Pod. I know there's never enough. I feel like there's a lot of great actual plays out there, but there's not a lot of discussion podcasts out there. At least that's my from my sphere of the Twitterverse. There seems to be far more actual plays than discussion pods. So we got to stick together and build
From
up.
those I've interacted with, I think it's a 5-to-1 ratio, or even bigger.
Yeah.
I have know some other discussion pods, but I know like 100 actual plays.
Yeah, exactly. And yeah, awesome. So thanks guys for being on the show. If you guys wanted to reach out to me, you can always do so by contacting me at roll_play_chat, or we have an email that's contact_roleplaychat@gmail.com, and that's roll with an ROLE. You would also encourage you to, give us a 5-star review or a thumbs up, or, regardless of what podcasting platform you're using, give us that love. Show us your love. Review us if you can. It goes a long way to help the show get the word spread out, and share the show with your friends. And with that, I'll thank my guests one last time and call it a chat.
Thank you.